Today, I'm changing out the radiator in my Toyota Hilux. However, if this isn't your specific vehicle, not to worry, the steps that I'm going to follow today should apply to basically any car or truck. So hopefully you guys find it useful. This should end up being quite a simple job, and we'll start off by draining the radiator. We'll unbolt the fan shroud and kind of pull it out of the way. We'll then disconnect the upper and the lower rad hose and this little hose on the top here. Then we will unbolt the radiator core and we'll pull it out. We'll of course slip the new one in and bolt everything back up again and fill it with coolant. The bottom of your radiator should have a drain hole. This drain hole is over here and there's a little valve that you turn right here. Now if your radiator doesn't have that, you may need to disconnect the lower rad hose and let it drain that way. There we go. So while this is draining, another thing that you can do is go and take loose or open up the radiator cap on top of the radiator, and that should let this drain a little bit faster. While the coolant is draining, we can go ahead and remove the radiator cap. We can also remove the expansion chamber hose. That's pretty easy. And we can remove the upper rad hose. Earlier on I mentioned that we would need to remove the fan shroud from the radiator before we actually remove the radiator. On this vehicle, in specifically this case, it doesn't seem to be so. There is a cutout at the bottom of the shroud, so we can pull the radiator out and it should clear the fan. However, on your vehicle, if it is the case, you can just unbolt and push the shroud back towards the motor. So I'm just going to take loose this little hose clamp on the top here. Now this hose is for the air conditioning. Whoops, see, got to watch out there. Of course, there's a little nut now that's just, or a little bolt that's fallen down to the bottom. Be my luck that it's actually fallen into the catch pan. And we're just going to pull this hose out of the way. Don't bend it too much, and now this whole lot should be able to come out as one unit. On the other side of this aircon hose, there was also a securing or a mounting point. Mine was already loose. I mean, this vehicle's about 20 years old, and it must have just unclipped itself. But nevertheless, they are fairly easy to unclip. So we take a pair of long nose pliers and we stick it into the opening at the back of the clip. And there's these two little ears. There's one on the top and there's one on the bottom here. So we kind of clamp it like that. We squeeze it together, and then this clip should come all the way out. So once the radiator is finished draining, I close this valve once again, and now we're going to remove the lower rad hose just by taking loose this little clamp. Now I'm guessing there may still be a little bit of leakage here, so I've still got my catch pan underneath, and let's go ahead and move it, see what happens. This may seem a little bit tricky, but I'm trying to do it and not get in the way of the camera so that you guys can see what's going on here. There we go. But, you know, for you doing it at home, just grab it from the front and then you should find that it'll come off fairly easily. There we go. I thought there might have been a little bit more spillage. Woohoo! So let me just go get a rag quickly. So I guess that didn't go too well, but nevertheless, you guys now know what not to do. But it's all drained out and we can continue to remove the radiator. In order to remove the radiator, we of course need to unbolt it. And there's 4 bolts and they're all bolted from the front of the vehicle and then through the chassis and then into the radiator itself. Now you don't have to go ahead and remove the bumper or the grille. You can access the bolts through the center of the grille through all the little gaps. So you're going to have to get yourself an extension and stick it through the gap, and if you have a close look inside there, you'll see the bolt. And also on the bottom, we're going to stick it through here, and we should be able to access the bottom bolts or the lower bolts on the radiator. Looking closely through the gap, there's one of the bolts, and the other one is on the other side, and then the lower ones are over there, and let me see if I can find it over there. Also something to note, especially for the lower bolts, I'm using a universal joint wrapped in a bit of insulation tape, and that just keeps the joint somewhat stable when you're turning it, and you can't really get into a tight spot. Now I realize you guys can't exactly see what I'm doing here, but it is fairly tight to get in here so that I can see and you can see at the same time, but you just have to take my word for it. I mean, you can get to these bolts. There we go. The spanner or the ratchet is on, and it should come loose. There we go. It is a little bit finicky, but as I said, I'm trying to give you guys somewhat of a view while I try and work here. I don't know if it's actually working. All 4 bolts are now out, and you may wonder why the radiator is not falling out the bottom of the vehicle. I'll show you why in just a second, but it's got little clips that clip into the front of the chassis. It just helps you when you're mounting it or you're taking it off. So effectively the radiator should now lift clean out the top of the vehicle. There we go, and just pull it up and out. So now we need to transfer the fan shroud, of course, from the old radiator onto the new radiator. There's 4 bolts, 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom. And you'll notice here, the top of the shroud has got sort of this raised section, and the lower section of the shroud has got a cutout. And this is why we didn't have to unbolt this and remove it before removing the radiator, because the fan just slips through this gap right here. So it makes it nice and easy, and it's pretty well designed. So what I was saying earlier is maybe your shroud, now on some vehicles it is like this, the shroud, this raised section will go all the way around. So you may have to then remove this entire shroud, like unbolt it, and you kind of pull it over the fan towards the engine. And once the shroud is unbolted from the radiator, then the radiator, you just pull out the gap at the top. So how did I know this radiator was leaking? Well, I don't have a low coolant light on this vehicle. It's pretty old. It's a 1999 model, so almost 25 years old. But there are telltale signs, and you can see the radiator is generally black in color, or in case of the new one, which is to the left there, it's silver. But you can see the discoloration over here. And if we look at the bottom of the radiator, well, I should say on the other side, the front of the radiator, now this faces outside of the vehicle, you can also see there's a little bit of blue, like gunk or schmoo here. So there was, of course, a leak here, and you can see also it is discolored over there. You can also see the general condition of the radiator is not very good. As I said, it's almost 25 years old, and it's starting to now disintegrate. It's definitely past its service life. However, there is another telltale sign that your radiator may be leaking, and it's pretty easy to see. The first clue that I got, and this is probably the most obvious clue that you're going to get, this is where my vehicle parks, and directly under where the radiator is, there was a wet spot. So it's kind of telling me, hey, something is up. It's going to be a good idea before you bolt the new radiator in, is to compare it to the old one, just to check that all the mounting holes are all in the same place, and that the radiator inlets and the outlets are all in the same place, they're the same size, and everything looks hunky-dory. Not that you end up battling when you try and put it in and then you realize, oh, it is very slightly different. Before we install the new radiator is to make sure that the drain valve is completely closed. You'll notice on either side of the front of the radiator, there's these little hooks, and these little hooks will go into holes on the front of the vehicle, and that helps hold the radiator in place and up so that the bolt holes line up while you're trying to bolt it up from the front of the vehicle. When you're installing this fan shroud onto the new radiator, at the bottom of the radiator there's this little like hook or plastic tab here, and this hook is going to hook around the plastic tab on the bottom of the fan shroud. Those little hooks that I was just telling you about, they hook into these little holes right here. So as we're feeding the radiator in here from the top, you can just keep an eye on those little hooks and the little holes that I was talking about earlier. Now you can't really see it from where you are, but when you're looking at it from the top, you can clearly see the little hooks and the holes. And there we go. It's hooked in and the radiator is now supporting itself, and now we can bolt it in. If you look carefully, you guys can see the black hook on the radiator, and that's just going to hook into the hole and everything's going to be nicely supported. Now because the radiator is hooked in, the bolt holes should all line up, and you can go ahead and insert each of the bolts, tighten it up. Now we can go ahead and connect up the upper rad hose, put the aircon pipe back onto its mounting points, and we can also go ahead and connect up the expansion chamber pipe. So remember, this one clicks in here at the bottom, just like that. Didn't click in very firmly, but as I said, it was already unclicked. I think it's just because it's really old. But it's got this nice bolt-on support at the top, which if we just slide the bolt through there and then slide our hose clamp here into place. Of course, don't forget the washer and the little nut. Yep, and you know, that would happen. So we can just tighten this up, not too tight because it is plastic, so that should be good enough. And our top rad hose here, slide into place, and then clip on our little clip. Last step is to connect up the lower rad hose, and you absolutely don't want to forget about this, because if you do, you're definitely going to waste a whole lot of coolant. So we want to push it on into place, grab it with the pliers once again, or grab the clip with the pliers. Now hopefully you guys can see this. My hand is probably in the way a little bit. Kind of slide it over into place. I may need to make the pliers a little bit smaller, just like that, and clip it over. Now we can see the hose is now secured into place. So the last step you absolutely don't want to forget, and that is to fill the system up with your coolant. Again, now I'm going to be using the Toyota Super Long Life coolant, but you guys can choose whatever you want, whatever you're most comfortable with. Now you can start the engine, let it warm up and check for any leaks. I also like to turn on the heater so it allows the coolant to circulate throughout the entire system. Talking about circulation, you may need to bleed air out of the system once the coolant has been drained and refilled again. This will vary from vehicle to vehicle, so maybe just check with your specific vehicle if there are any specific procedures that need to be followed. In my case, I just took the vehicle for a drive, brought it back home, let it cool down, opened up the radiator once it was cool, and I only had to top up just a really small amount of coolant, and that was it, and it was good to go. If you guys want to learn more about servicing your vehicles, go watch this video right here. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.